Okay, hello and welcome. I'm Jason Gumpert from MSDynamicsWorld.com, and we're here for a new session in our Spring 2015 Financial Automation webcast series. Today I'm happy to welcome back a returning speaker for us, Norman Carmichael. He is the VP of Industry Solutions at Columbus, and he's here to review some of the new functionality that's now available in Dynamics AX 2012 R3 around demand forecasting. Before we get started, I'd like to briefly recognize our financial automation webcast series sponsors. Thank them for their support of MSDynamicsWorld.com. They are Perceptive Software, Metafile, DocStar, Bottomline Technologies, and Avalara. So as we get started, please know that you can use the Q&A block or the chat that you'll see on the right side of the webcast today. Use the Q&A to ask your questions, and I know Norman will be making time to take those during the event today. So without any further delay, Norman, let me hand it off to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Let me get moving on here. I guess we only have an hour today, so I want to try to cover as much as I can. And like Jason said, I'm open to questions as we go. It probably makes it easier, but if you have something at the end, I'm also open to hearing it then. So as he mentioned, I'm the VP of Industry Solutions here at Columbus. I've got over 25 years of industry experience. Most of my background is actually in operations management. I was on the other side of the fence for the majority of my career, mainly in manufacturing and distribution management. And what's appealing about this topic is I've spent very large portions of my career worrying about demand forecasts. And I was an AX user for 7 years, running a manufacturing operation. So understand some of the limitations and kind of like what I see here as at least a little bit of a stopgap program here that Microsoft's put in place to get some decent capabilities around demand forecasting without having to make the large investment to go to a best of breed. As it states here at the very end, I am an active member and volunteer with APIX. I was a past president of the San Diego chapter of APIX, currently on the board here in San Diego for the local chapter, and also did some time on the APIX board of directors out of Chicago for a couple years back in 2012, 2013. So have a little bit of background in the stuff, so hopefully I can answer most of your questions as they come up, and like I said, feel free to interrupt me as we go. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. So we're going to talk about demand forecasting in AX 2012 R3 and talk about what it is and kind of what it isn't. It does have the ability, the new demand forecasting module or processes within the master planning module have the ability to generate a statistical baseline forecast, which is a new feature in AX. Before we just had the table to put things into. Now we have the ability to at least generate a starting point baseline forecast that's based on statistical analysis. It is incorporating advanced Microsoft data mining techniques. So we're using SSAS and using some capabilities within SSAS to do that. Because we're using Excel as kind of the front end for this, we now have the ability, and we're using cubes as the place to store the data, we have the ability to start creating visualizations. And I think that's a powerful piece of this. And as I go through this, I'll actually be demoing some of the processes. And I've put together a little demo set to walk through to maybe explain how this works and give you guys a chance to see it if you haven't seen it already. The other nice thing is you've got access with this forecasting to all of the things you have access to within the standard forecast, demand forecast section of AX. You have site, warehouse, SKU, family, SKU, family SKU, group, customer group, etc. All those kind of things. And you can also you can modify and customize to add additional capabilities if you need to. One other powerful piece is you've got the ability to remove those outliers that kind of skew your numbers sometimes, low numbers and high numbers or certain customer mixes. If you know a customer is going to disappear from your future view, you can actually use queries to exclude those. Another really key feature that I like is the fact that they built into this some basic error metrics around forecasting, mean, absolute deviation, and mean absolute percentage error are now built into the forecasting cubes. So you can run a process after you've forecasted and sold your product to see how you're doing against forecasts and use that as another criteria. Another really nice thing is you have the ability, the way this works is it does look at it, it goes through a process of doing a bottoms up, and then it can disaggregate it top down. So you can gather up your forecast from the detail level, push it up to a family, and then spread it back down based on criteria and mix ratios you want to have. So that really is a powerful piece. And it also does accommodate, because we're using the cubes and we're not using AX tables as a primary interface. We're using it as a secondary interface. The cubes become the primary. We can now push other data sources into the mix here. So we can use Excel files, we can use CSVs. Companies who are running maybe multiple platforms, there are companies out there with multiple divisions, some on 2009, some on 2012. If your primary forecasting group is on 2012, you can pull data from the databases of 2009 to bring it over. And because we're using cubes and we're using Excel, we can do what-if analysis on what's going on with this forecast before we push it back into to be actionable. So what's really the value proposition? Why is this something that makes sense for some people? Well, a lot of it is because the biggest thing is it's really built into AX and it's got some modularity. So it's not like you have to go all in. It's not like you're having to make a big change to how you do things today. It's really something that adds on to it, kind of bolts on using the cubes and using Excel to give you an additional way to see your forecast information, create metrics around it, make decision points around it, and then a lot more simply than in the past, push it back into AX to make it something that the master scheduling and master planning module can use. It is reusing the Microsoft Stack, so you've got the ability to now leverage the things you already own. You've got SSAS built into AX. You've got all these other capabilities there. This gives you access to tools that you already own and have already paid for versus having to buy a whole new system. And because you're not having to have a high expense, the fact that you can see this information, make these decisions, and hopefully improve your forecasting capabilities, the ROI should be pretty high and pretty quick. At least relatively high based on the cost you're spending here to do this, which is, because it's out of the box part of AX, is really almost just a time issue, not a cost issue. One note here, though, I do want to mention is that I don't think people should view demand forecasting as a best-of-breed forecasting software solution. That if you really have a deep need to do a deep dive into how you're forecasting, you've got a lot of complexity, and you want to do a lot of decisions outside of the ERP before you push it back in. That's really not what this is about. This is about leveraging and extending the capabilities of what AX has, leveraging the data inside of AX and the data groupings inside of AX to make better decisions to update your forecast more quickly. So that's really in a nutshell, that's what this is about. See if I can get to the next slide to go. There we go. So what is demand forecasting? So what are we talking about here? So there's really 5 steps. First step is you create a baseline forecast, and I'll be demoing this here in a few minutes, but it really is the ability to then have the system using, inside of AX, using, X++ code, go through, look at your sales history, look at your transaction history, whatever the parameters are you've set around it, and make a decision around what content should be used, and then group and kind of bucket it by product families or item numbers or groups or customers or customer groups or sites and warehouses, all the different dimensions you have around the forecasting module today. You have access to those and the ability to kind of slice and dice those. Once it's done that and it's looked at your kind of baseline forecast and looks at the information, it then can apply algorithms, and there's really 2 different algorithms and then a blend of the 2 called mixed. One is ARIMA and the other is which ARIMA is a standard. It's really otherwise known as Box Jenkins. The other one is a Microsoft kind of more specific one called ArtXP, and I'll talk to those here in the next slide about where to use those and why to use those. You also have the ability to blend those 2. So they do have different value propositions. One is more for short term, which is ArtXP. The other one, ARIMA, is more for long-term forecasting. You also have the ability not to do those algorithms at all and just bring over your historical so you can then amend it and do other things maybe off in Excel. Once you've done that and once you've got your data into the cubes and you're looking at that data, you now have the ability to get in with Excel and manipulate the data. And and I'll show you that in a minute. It's not just quickly seeing it and doing a whole bunch of data entry like you would do it in AX. You're able to do things, this whole concept of top down, bottom up, middle out. You have the ability now to make edits to pivot tables that affect the cube and automatically apply ratios back based on the forecast. And I'll show you that capability here a little bit later on as well. And you can also, because you've got Excel now, you can start to graph it and see how the trends are going. You can break and slice and dice it using all the tools we know and love inside of Excel around pivot tables and slicers to be able to do that. And once you're happy with that, you can push all that back into the cubes and continue to refine it, look at it, have the team approve it. And then when you're done, you actually import it back into AX. And that's a key differentiator here is that, that you don't have to, you can continually do iterative work on these forecasts, and you can have multiple people working on the forecast in a shared environment to push their pieces up, review that information, and then you do have that final AX step, which is to bring that cube data back and repopulate the demand forecast tables that we all know and love. So you have that ability to do that work, and then MRP can work with it and do its thing. The other nice feature they've added is that ability to generate a second cube, which is the forecast accuracy cube, and that's where we can look at, how are we performing, as long as we're doing a good job of controlling the data that stays in the forecast table, we can start to look at how do we perform against forecast down to those dimensions. So when we look at items and product families and customers and customer groups and sites and warehouses and cities and states, or states and countries, we can start to see how did we do, and we can start to use that as education to make better decisions in the future. So what are those three different models we talked about? So ARIMA is a autoregressive integrated moving average, also known as Box-Jenkins. It looks at trends, it looks at seasonality, it looks at cyclicality and randomness. You've got parameters to kind of manage how it looks at those. You've got levers to kind of tweak to make it more responsive or less responsive. It's really best for long-term predictions when we're looking out 5 periods or more. That's where it really shines. ArtXP is autoregressive trees with cross prediction, and this is a Microsoft forecasting model. Really best for short term. It's really looking at your short term numbers and trying to apply kind of that next phase, that next period, and making decisions around that. And then you have Mix, which is a blend of those two. I'm not really going to give too much guidance on either of those. It's something you got to kind of play with right now. I've been messing around with it a little bit, and so far ARIMA seems to be, at least from the world I've come from, the best fit, because generally, other than, at least in manufacturing, what I'm used to doing, you're usually not managing and tweaking your forecast too much within the first 3 to 4 months anyway, because of lead times and just your overall plan and what you're doing with your customers. There might be some, there are businesses where you need more, maybe that ArtXP type approach, but for what I'm doing here is more of an ARIMA approach I'm going to show. And then, like I said, the key is you have the ability to mix those, and you have parameters to manage how that mixes and how those things, how ARIMA and ArtXP makes its decisions. Okay, so you'll see here you've got some additional parameters I've listed, like historical model gap, historical model count, missing value substitution, where you can find and try to blend, find if it has missing values, it tries to make substitutions for those values, and you can manage parameters around that. You can start to tell it to look for periodicity, or you can even give it hints or guidance to periodicity. I'm not going to go into too much detail on all these parameters. I will at the very end here show, on customer source and partner source, there is a link to the demand forecast white paper. If you're interested in this, I suggest you download it and read those. It's about a 54-page document and has a lot more detail into how this all kind of comes together and how it works. Okay. So what's why do you want to do this? What's the benefit of going down this path versus going down a best of breed? And I would say, just before I get into the bullets here, really, that's a decision you got to make. The best of breed is really if you have a really tough time forecasting and you've got a lot of variables and a lot of different inputs, and you really are truly all in on statistical management of your forecast. But I think that's, those people, you're probably already on best of breed anyway, and I don't know that this is going to be a good replacement for that. But if you are in the business of managing your forecast using standard AX and you need additional help and you'd like some suggestions and you'd like a better way to manage and visualize that data, I definitely see a huge value in moving towards this as your solution as you get on to R3. Or if you're already on R3, definitely I would look at this a little deeper if you haven't. The key is you're leveraging those tools you already have. It is seamlessly integrated. So, the nice part is you're not having to worry about anything. There's not a bunch of setup you have to do. There's not, there's not, a DIXF type situation where you're having to manage and map things. it's really out of the box, ready to go. Pretty simple to get moving right away. It's easy to configure. You've got modularity to it, and because it's using tools we're all used to with Excel, it makes it pretty easy to make those decisions. It really makes it easier for you to look at how you can. To me, that visualization is really the key, and I'm going to show you that in just a second. When I get into I'm going to run an actual process for you and let you see it in action. It gives you, I think if you're slicing and dicing it the right way, and you're pulling in your forecast at the right criteria, at the right dimensional level, it starts to show you some insightful analysis. It starts to let you see why things are changing the way they are. Forecasting is still a game of guessing. So it's not like it's not a push a button and get the number. It's a push a button, get a starting point, do some thinking and make some adjustments type process. And I think this is a great tool to do that in a very low cost manner. Okay. So the other thing to do here is, it lets you evaluate that performance, and that's something I think that's been missing, and it's something I even looked for when I was a customer. I used to have to build my own reports to try to figure this out, but the fact that we've got a cube right now that's ready to go, that with the click of an OK button on a form, we'll generate that. We'll look at those based on those dimensions. Look at that history. Look at that forecast you've entered, and give you those values in a matter of a minute or so is a nice add, and I think it's great that they finally got that in the product. And all of these together, if you've got better visibility to your forecast and you've got a way to manage and maintain it, it should help you improve your operations and supply chain planning. Those of us who have an operational background, the forecast is our nemesis and our friend. And the more we can get it updated, the more often we can update it, and the easier we can update it, and the more visually we can see the changes to it and the trends to it, the easier it is for us to do our jobs. And that's what I like about this solution, is I think it's going to make people's jobs a little bit easier than what they've seen in the past. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you'll see this here in a second. I'll give it just a moment. It says I'm sharing, but I'm going to give it just one moment. I'm actually going to quickly pull out the chat and the Q&A in case anybody has questions so that I see all of that. Okay, so I'm going to assume right now you can see my screen, and this is our standard AX screen. Nothing new, nothing exciting here. It's as we would expect. Where we're looking to go here is, first I'm going to go into master planning, which is where these new pieces reside. And if you're currently a 2012 R3 user, or if you have access to a system, be it as a customer or a partner, you may have seen this new section here called demand forecasting. So you'll see in the setup a demand forecasting section. And this is where you have really the three key parameter management settings. One is your demand forecasting parameters, your forecasting algorithm parameters, and then the queries you use to remove outliers. I'm going to quickly open up the demand forecasting parameters and show you just some of the basics of it. So you have the ability, to set the demand forecast unit. It does have to be common across all items, so generally most people set it as eaches and make sure they're driving some kind of a unit conversion to drive eaches as their forecast, because that is one of the things, because you're grouping things together by family, you need to have a common approach there, at least as a default. You point to the cube you want for forecast, which is already set up as your demand forecast initial. You can modify and extend that if you need to, but out of the box it's ready to go. Same thing with the accuracy. And then you point to where you want your Excel file to be. Where is it going to push this data? Because what it will do is it will generate an Excel file. One really nice feature that I'm going to show you here in a minute is not only will it generate that file the first time, but if the file's there and you've modified that file to give you additional capabilities or views you want to see, it will not overwrite that file. What it will do is it really is just updating that data at that point after it's built the first one and built the connection. It's really just updating the data in the cube, and now your file is now ready to read that cube the way it wants to read it based on the setup you've done. Okay. You then also have the ability to manage what transactions are read in order to do this. So you'll see here I just said sales order only for what I'm doing here, but I can have it look at, for my dependent demand, look at other things, and I can also have it look at just, the transaction table in general. And then you have the ability to manage how you do your forecasting, and this is where you put in the ARIMA or the ARTXP. This is where you start to put in some of those additional values. One really nice feature here is when I set all this up for what my options are, I can also by item allocation key set those again and have different views. So I can have by product line or by item allocation key a different set of parameters and criteria to manage that forecast. And I think that's a very powerful approach. Okay. And these are where you look at the forecast dimensions. These are the out-of-the-box 7 items you can use to kind of group and sort things. And for my demo here, I've said just give me the stock keeping unit, give me the customer group, and give me the customer account. Okay. And then real quick here, this is some of the things out of the box here that are your kind of your levers you can move. You know, what are your minimums? How do you split things up? How do you smooth predictions? All these kind of things. You know, I'm not going to go into these. I'll let you look to that document for more information around what these mean. But these are really your levers to smooth out the forecast. Okay. So most of us, you know, if we go back, I'm assuming almost everybody on the call here is an AX user and has played with this beautiful form. You know, this is what, you know, if you're not using an add-on forecasting tool, this is where, you know, we live and breathe. And it's honestly not an easy tool to use. I mean, it does the job. It lets you put in a forecast by date, by line, by quantity. It does all those things you think it should do. And it does enough to get you a decent plan out of it. And it definitely does what you need to do so MRP can run and make its decisions. But visually, it leaves a lot to be desired. And, you know, but, you know, thankfully we always had the report that we could fall back onto, which was just as horrible as the form. So what I really like about what they've done here is this data and this information is the information that will end up into the cubes. But now we have a better way to look at it. We have a different way to approach it, okay? So what I'm going to do real quick is just go through the process and show you how simple it is to actually do this. So if I go over here to periodic, I've got the steps I talked about, which is generate your statistical baseline forecast, then you import it, and you look at your accuracy. I'm going to go ahead and generate that, and I have a single allocation key I've created for the televisions that are, you know, 2 televisions that are in the demo database. And this is where I can start to have some controls over. I can look backwards and say, where do I want to look back? I want to look back over this year. So I want to go back to January 1st, 2012, so the whole calendar year 2012, and I want a forecast that starts in 2013. And I'm going to do it for televisions. I want to give me a forecast that's in monthly buckets. You know, it could be daily or weekly if you want to do smaller buckets. How many of those do I want to look at? I want to create one for 12 months, and I want to say the first 3 months are frozen. I can also transfer manual adjustments, and this is something that we can talk to later, or probably better for you to read through the document. This is really where, by transferring the manual adjustments, once you get into a working session and you're making those changes, it'll continue to hold those in the cube, so it does track the adjustments you make and leaves them in there. And if you can use those kind of to manage your what if and see what was adjusted, so you can see who made what changes prior to you finishing it. And then generally, you know, from what I've been able to tell here through my work with this is you would do that as you're getting into the working sessions and see that work, and then you can clear it out at the very end if you want to kind of refresh it on a new period. So I'm going to start without transferring that just to make it easier. And this is the file it's going to go to. So once I've got this all set up, it's as simple as just hitting OK, and then, you know, waiting for basically the cube to be generated. So what it's going to do right now, as I showed earlier on the slides, is it's going through and looking at that 1 year's history for the items that are in that allocation group. It's gathering up that history, and then it's doing that analysis. So it's doing more than just generating the forecast. It's actually doing that second step, which is now applying the ARIMA model to it, looking for the periodicity, looking to see where, you know, what trends it sees, and then trying to generate a forecast it thinks makes sense based on the information it read from that year. So I made sure I had a full year's of the transactions here for these parts in 2012, tried to have somewhat of a sloping trend to it. I didn't have anything crazy in there where I had big outliers, so I didn't run any outlier removal here. But I do want to show you, visually here in a second when this finishes, what it looks like. So once it's done, you'll get this info log that says, hey, I'm finished. I've got my statistical forecast has been created, and all I have to do actually is just double click here, and it'll open the Excel file. and it's going to open the Excel file that it was pointing to in the settings. So, back to my point is this is the table it built. So it's really just reading the cube. There is no data in the spreadsheet. Okay, the spreadsheet is just set up to read it. So if I click anywhere here, you'll see I get my pivot table controls here. And this is where I built this pivot table with these groupings in mind. Out of the box when it generates it, it usually just gives you an all up one by the item allocation key. I added in the item number, I added in the customer group, and I even added in the customer. So it read through all that history. And since I told it in my setup to look at customers and customer groups, it took and made a guess at what it thought would be a good forecast for these two different TVs by month in 2013 based on the trend. Okay. I built this graph here very simply with just a few clicks and just added a few slicers to be able to take that same data, and I took two pieces of data from this. So if I click on this, I should get my setup here. I took the read-only historical information, so you'll see from December 2012, which I don't know if you can see my pointer or not, but right there, backwards is my historical, and then right from here forward in red is my forecast going forward. So you'll see it tries to approximate and follow a trend line. So this, this product here was fairly flat for the first 8 months of the year, and then started having this ramp. So it's made a decision, based on what it saw and based on the settings I set, that ramp is going to continue. You can see that it kind of at about month 8 again, did a little bit of a dip, so it's almost like you could take that blue and kind of blend those two, and you'll see that it did kind of try to approximate the trend line that it saw from over here. Same thing here with the other product. It was a little more flat. It shows that it's went from just below 300, 289 was the historical January number, and it ended up here at if I go to December at 344. So it's saying it's going to go from 341 to here. So I can see these trends, and because I have the slicers on, if I can click on the right place here, I can look at, is it different between the two groups? If I want to see just item 10, what's the trend look like? If I want to see just group 30, what does it look like? I could even add a slicer for the customer itself and do that. So you have the ability to quickly see kind of what's going on and look at your numbers and make some decisions, okay? So this is also where if I wanted to work with this forecast, so if I was the planner in charge of this and I wanted to make some moves, maybe one of the things we like to do in our company is maybe we don't like weird numbers. Maybe we like evened out numbers. So I could make a decision here and just start rounding some of these down. So you'll see if I make this 600 instead of that, or 660, wasn't it? Yeah. If I make it 660, it'll actually start to try to apply those down below. So if I make it 650, it automatically is doing that kind of top-down allocation of the forecast. So I don't have to go through there and modify those, and it will do the rounding itself when it puts it back in. But I can quickly start to change some of these numbers and override them and do what I think I need to do to kind of maybe round the numbers out. And if I could just type correctly, I'd be better off. So hopefully that makes sense so far. That I can do that. At the same time, I can also, from a bottoms-up standpoint, I could do the same thing. I could say, well, I don't like this. I want this to be 15, and I want this to be 35. And you'll see it's automatically making those changes, okay? So everywhere where I've made an entry, you'll also see I get the little comment mark here, little red corner. So that tells me what I've done to make changes to it, okay? So I'm going through and I'm making these changes. I'm looking at the information. I can do whatever I need to do here. If I wanted to change this forecast, I can very simply upload this. So if I was to go back here to my Analyze, I go to my What If, and I can publish my changes. So if I was to make these changes, these would then get applied to the cube, not to AX yet, but to the cube at this point to become my first pass work with this. Okay, so if I was to publish these, it would go through the process. I'm not going to publish them now, just because I'm going to use a different thing to show you how I publish in a minute here. So hopefully that makes sense so far. So I have the ability now within the items, within the customers, within any of the dimensions I've set up for my forecasting, I have the ability to manage and change numbers. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to save this file for right now, and I'm just going to get out of here. So one other thing that I wanted to at least show a little bit here, since because I have this as a cube, and because I have that forecast, version that I've created there that I can use, I can have multiple versions of Excel talking to the same cube. So I created this one called demo. And what I was trying to do here with this demo one was show, what can I do? Let's say I'm an MPI planner and I've got new product introduction I have to deal with. I can read that same data. So this is a read of exactly those same values that were in the table, in the cube here that we just published and generated a moment ago. I can read those, and let's say I created I want to do a process of maybe phasing in and phasing out an item. So I've created in this scenario here, if I go back over to AX and I go into my product release product section here, and I'm going to quickly just kind of show you something here. So I created a couple items. 005 is this, 50 some odd inch TV. That is one of my examples here. And I've decided there's a new model that's going to come out. Instead of being the X590, it's the X595. So I've created this new part number, which is kind of the replacement model. So I need to do a phase-in, phase-out approach to how I manage the forecast. I'm not expecting there to be a big jump or change in my demand. I think people will still buy it. It's the same class of television with the same features, but it's this year's model, and I got to drive my demand in my factory to get it going. So how do I do that? So with this scenario here, I've got this table. And I've got the ability here I created this little phase-in worksheet where I went through and I just copied in my item, and I created a bunch of VLOOKUPs to go look at what my forecast looks like. So this is that forecast, my NPI forecast currently for these items. So I went through here and I said, okay, I want to go through and give me that forecast for the item. So I've matched it all up. And then I created what I call a reduction. So I created manually just a formula that says, hey, starting in June, I think I got to kind of phase this in and phase it out because it's not going to happen overnight. I got to kind of ramp up production. So I'm going to do 30% of it will happen in June, then 50%, then 60%, 80%, then by October I'll be 100%. So I just applied that and created my formulas here to get these different values. Okay. So what I can do with this is that concept of phasing in and phasing out. It's not an automated approach. You never know what they might do with the next approach, but I at least want to show that the capabilities are there for us to do this. So what I'm going to do now, I've got my spreadsheet here. I'm going to go back over here to my AX, and I'm going to go back into my master planning, and I'm going to generate a new forecast, and I'm going to add something because I created an allocation key called new products. And that new product allocation key contains that item. So I'm going to add to my planning, here, I'm going to add the new product allocation key. So that'll include the T0021 item. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to run it again. It's going to execute its process. And this time now, when I get my my forecast spreadsheet, it's going to have a different set of data in there. It's going to have those two items, T0004, T0005, and it's going to have a third item, which is T0021. Let's give this just a moment. Should be just about finished here. Okay, so there we go. So now when I double click my file, you see it added the T0021 to it. Okay, so you see I've got my T0021. So I'm going to collapse these down because I'm doing a high level forecast here at the top level. So I'm just going to look at these at a very high level. So I've got this item here. Now I just put in ones in there just to get a placeholder in. That was one of the settings you have a control over, is what's your minimum value. Because the T0021 has no history, when it does all that work and it looks through and tries to find history, it doesn't find it. It had a parameter set up that said, hey, if I can't find anything, if there is no history, put a value in there. The value I said to put in was 1. Okay? So that's what this is here. So I'm going to go through this now. Just one thing, just so you know, zeros It doesn't really like zeros, I've learned it, and even in the white paper it talks about putting in a 0.0001, but the divide by zero comes into play at times, so it has some issues with zeros. But what I'm going to do here is just kind of walk through what would I do if I was working on this scenario as a planner. So I know what I'm going to need here, which is I need the following numbers in play. So if I wanted to change my forecast, I can make a change to it. Actually, I apologize. Let me refresh this real quick here. I need to refresh my data. There we go. Okay. So back to my worksheet. So my T0005, I'm going to change its numbers. Let me just put this down so I can show both of them at the same time. I'm going to start adding here. So this is my first value. I can't enter. The yellow fields here means I can't enter in them. So it's not actually going to publish those, even though I entered values where I showed you there before. It's not going to publish those values because it's in the frozen period. But over here where I'm going to start entering, I don't need to change this one. I don't need to change this one. This one should become 228. I'm just showing you this just as an example to show that I can enter these in. You can also paste the values in, but I'm just going to enter them in. So you see that's my reduction, and then I'm going to get down to a no plan and a no plan and a no plan. So I'm going to put the zeros in there. Just it should, at the top level, should be fine. It's when you get into the lower levels, right, you have problems. So I'm just going to kill off that plan altogether. Okay. Going up top here, my phase in is a little different here. I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to put in my first time is in June. I'm going to have 98. Then I'm going to have 165, 199, 267, 342, 348, 351. So I've now changed my forecast. I haven't actually changed my numbers, but I definitely changed my mix, so my overall forecast is still the same. And once I'm done and happy with this, I can now go into Analyze, OLAP Tools, and I can do my Publish Changes. Okay? So it should be done now. I can close this, save my forecast, save this out here as well. Okay. So now that I've done that, I can actually generate my forecast. I'm going to generate it one more time. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to import it now. I'm not going to do the generate. So I'm going to do import. So now I'm going to bring that forecast back in. If I was to regenerate again and I was to tell it to leave the, hold on to the manual adjustments, it would give me the manual adjustment values. For sake of time here, I'm going to move on, just go right to importing forecast. So now that I've done that, and I like the forecast, I like what I see, I'm going to go ahead. And actually, let me just check something real quick. This is always the proof is in the pudding here, I guess. I'm going to go through to my T0021 item that I had earlier. And I want to look at the actual planning, and let's make sure there's no demand forecast in there. You'll see there's no demand forecast. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and create now. I'm going to import, and if I do it right and it works as planned, I should end up with that forecast that I had in the spreadsheet in there for this item. Okay, so I'm going to say import forecast. It now asks me what time frame. I want to do it for this time frame. And say save your manual adjustments to the baseline. Yes, I want to save those. And I'm going to say OK. And it's going to say, hey, if I find something here that matches, I'm going to overwrite it. Are you sure you want to do that? Yes, I do. Let's turn it loose and let it go. So it's made 175 manual adjustments. So we went through and found all the items where I had issues and changes. And part of why it made that many adjustments, if I go back to that spreadsheet, I did the entries at the highest level, but because it does that, bottoms up, top down approach, and it kind of it uses the visualization back, it applies it back against all those entries, and it goes all the way down to the customer level. I hit enough items there to hit 175 entries into the actual forecast table. So now if I go back to this again, and I go back to my item, and I look at my release products, and I go find my T21, and I now have a forecast for those items. Okay. I can just, if I don't want these ones out here, I can just quickly go clean those up, get rid of those. And now I have a forecast for my new item coming in, and I'm phasing out my old item. And if I go look at my old items forecast, it'll be a little different detail because it's going to be drilling down down to the customer level, but I can quickly go look at this and see this here. Okay. Actually, I'm on the wrong. I didn't click the right item. Hold on. Let me click on this. There we go. So you'll see I get in, it's still, the forecast is now down at this level, but it's made all those changes. So now the numbers, you'll see it stops here in September. Starting October, I don't have a forecast for it, and you'll see the September forecast is limited to a lot smaller quantity than what was there before. Okay. So in a nutshell, that's all it really takes to be able to get the forecast generated, work with it in Excel, push it back into AX, now have it actionable and ready to go in AX. The last piece here I did want to show you is calculating your forecast demand accuracy. And this is a step you can run anytime where it's going to do this look back. And it's going to say, give it to me how. And I'm going to go simply to say monthly buckets. I'm going to say go back and look over the last 2 years and tell me what it sees for the televisions here. And what is my accuracy, and then put it into this file. Once again, this is another file where you can manage and maintain that file and build out all the information you want, different versions of pivot tables, different versions of graphs. All those things can be generated in that file and saved in that file. All this is going to do is know that's where it's at, and it's going to make sure the link is correct so they can talk to it. Okay. So I'm going to say OK here, let it do its thing. This takes 30 seconds or so, hopefully. Give it just a moment. I toyed with whether I would just have all these open and done or run it, but I think running it's the right way for you to see it. So now I didn't clear the messages before, so you'll see the previous messages, but saying it right here, the demand forecast accuracy was calculated, and click here to get your Excel file. So click here. I could actually just go open the file too, but here's my accuracy. It does write the record of when it generated, what it did, and what the values were. And then this is the actual table it created. And this can be tailored. I left this standard, so it shows you what the historical demand was, what your adjusted was, what your absolute error is, and what your absolute percentage error is by default. So I went off and created the MAD and MAPE graphs. So here's an example of the MAD graph. And this is where you can see, what was my mean absolute deviation, what was the absolute error for each month. And I can start to look at where it's impacted. Was it, was it the 4? Was it the 5? The 5, they definitely have different trend lines, and I can slice and dice that however I need to slice and dice that. Okay. So that's how this works. And this is by, like I said, you're looking at my item allocation key, but you get the slicers to be able to slice it is the best way to do it. You can build these up individually by item as well. I found it performs a lot better when you're just working at the item allocation key level and using the slicers, but either way would work. But it does have a little bit of performance hit when you're trying to do a multi-layered or multi-dimensional approach I've seen for this cube. Same thing with the MAPE. I can do the same look at it, and actually you'll see they tend to follow themselves pretty well. I don't have a ton of data here, so the actual trend lines, if I look at these trend lines between the combined here and I look at this one, they're more or less the same. They're skewed a little bit different, but they're pretty much the same skewing because the quantities are roughly the same, and the error percentage against the quantities, we're not seeing wild swings against this. So I would expect it to be somewhat similar. So. Okay. So that was really all I had for demo at this point. I'm going to go back here to my slideshow here. So at this point, I'm going to open up to any questions you guys might have. One thing I think I mentioned at the beginning, and I do think I want to stress this, that for anyone who's interested in this, one of the best places to go is really to look for the demand forecasting white paper that's out on Customer Source and Partner Source. I did go double check and see that they're both there, and I put the links here, but all you have to do is if you log into Customer Source or Partner Source and just do a search for demand forecasting white paper, you'll get, or demand forecast white paper, you will get the link right here as your number one search item. So it's really an interesting paper to look at. It has a lot of good information, and it really does a better job of explaining it than I can ever do. But I at least wanted to show you guys kind of what I learned kind of playing with it, and putting my old operations hat back on. I see a decent amount of value here with this product. I see the ability to, for planners to be able to quickly visualize and see things that are going on and make quick edits. It's a lot easier to make the edits in these values than what I am used to doing in the old demand forecast table that was native in AX. And I think there's a lot of exciting things here that the system can do as we go forward. At this point, I'm going to open up to any questions, see if anyone has anything they want to ask or any comments.
All right, so please do enter your questions now. Norman, we have a question that I don't think you're actually probably seeing, but it says, can you review how to set the product groups to forecast a particular set of items at the same time?
Oh yeah, the item allocation. Okay, I can do that. And also, someone else did just type in here: is the white paper kind of a training manual? Kind of. It does have. It's not a full-blown training manual, but it does walk you through the steps, and it does do a lot more explanation around what's happening kind of behind the scenes. And it has, really the back third of the document is kind of some different scenarios they walk through, and they talk about how some of the values change. So let me do this. Let me get into the item allocation key setup. And that's actually, and this item allocation key is really it's something that the white paper stresses that I didn't really stress here, but I probably should have. And let me share my screen again. Is that when you create these item allocation keys, you want to think about it more like a product family or a product grouping, because it is going to do its decision making and its work on those similar groups, and you want that similarity to be in play, because if it's not, you're going to get some odd information or odd results. So I'm about to share my screen now to go back into AX. Okay, so hopefully now everybody's seeing AX again, and here I am in the inventory management module, and this is where under forecast the item allocation keys exist, and this is where you do the setup for those. So this is the example I had was televisions here. So in televisions, you have the ability to add your line items to this. Okay, so I tried to keep this simple, and just for the sake of time and make sure that things didn't run away on us here. I created just I took the one that was in there, the simple two items, which is T0004 and T005, and I set it right now. I didn't get into trying to forecast all the colors. I just said I'm going to forecast one attribute, which as just generically as the silver or the white. If I wanted to be more complex, I could have put the color in there, and we would have had more of a skew variant. And I would have had four items each based on how these items are set up. But for simplicity, I chose not to do that. When I mentioned about that kind of top-down, bottom-up approach, one of the things you can do here within this is set the percentages, so you can have it do that bottom-up aggregation. So when the process runs through and looks at T004 and looks at all of its sales, this percentage field here allows you to put in a percentage to be able to kind of reapply that mix. So if you want to override what the system is seeing as historical and you want to try to fix the ratios between the different variants or between the different items within the group, you can do that here and have it kind of disaggregate it back down amongst the children items. That's something you need to kind of play with and see if it makes sense for your business. But this is what you do: is you set these items up and you add them into these groups, and that's how that works. What I did create this one called new product, and I inserted my one line item, really just to give a separate setting so that I could control and not have it try to include that in the forecast. When it did the forecast for the TVs, I wanted the TVs to look at the list of items that are there and be able to look at history and not be skewed by this item without history. But I gave it this new forecast, this new item allocation, so that I could use it as my new product introduction. Once I have it in there, and once it's released, and once we start moving and we start getting history around it, and we're generating based on the data it has, then we move it into the other allocation key. Okay, so hopefully that answered the question that they had there.
Okay, why don't we make a last call for questions here. I'm not seeing any others in the queue other than the one
I'm
about
looking too.
product grouping.
Actually, let me see here. What's this? My Q&A. Yeah, it's just the two. Oh, so Microsoft Training Manuals. So any Microsoft Training Manual is available like any other module. I need to double check that. I don't know that they've updated the master planning training for R3 yet. I'd have to go look at Partner Source and see. I use the white paper. I mean, I will tell you the white paper was enough for me to get a really good understanding of how this works. It's not that much additional. I mean, master planning is still master planning once the data gets back in there. This is really more around getting the data into the cubes and then managing it with the stack tools of SSAS and Excel. So I don't know that there's going to be a deep training setup against this for master planning for Microsoft, but I could be wrong. It could be something that they're planning or coming out in a new release. But I would say check Partner Source or check Customer Source and see what's out there, see if they've done an update for the master planning training. Any other questions?
I see a question here. Can you expand on using AX 2009 as the history?
Yeah, I'm not that technical, so I'll try best I can. The key is you have the ability, because we're using the cubes, to be able to do some work kind of in the SQL side of it, not in the AX side, but be able to do some linkage to where using the SQL side and using a little bit of code within AX to be able to point to that SQL instance also to grab the data, not just the data that's inside of 2012 sales tables. So that's something that I think that probably would be good for a follow-on, maybe a deeper dive on another presentation with someone more technical than myself. Because you can also, from what Microsoft is saying within their white papers, you can also point to other things. You could have, if someone was running a separate, let's say, e-commerce platform or something, or running some other system that wasn't tying in directly to AX or maybe didn't correlate properly to AX, they could push some of that data into a CSV file or into some other kind of connection to be included in the numbers as well. Okay. And then I see here someone else said item allocation is similar to product grouping. And now that's the one I think maybe that's the one I just explained. Yes, it is. You create it within there, and it doesn't have any limitations. You can it's another way to stratify your products for forecasting similarities.
And we have a question asking, what would you suggest for a new implementation where historical sales data does not exist? Is there any way to import the sales data and get a baseline forecast?
Yeah, and I think that's really the case that they're talking about here with the white paper where it talks about using another database source as the place to read from. So yes, it is possible. I mean, I guess I'd have to defer to somebody more technical than myself, but my guess is what you would do is within the first pass of the process that generates the data, instead of initially I would create a version of this that instead of reading from that table, reads from a flat file or some kind of an import table you'd bring in. A lot of times on implementations that we've done this for multiple customers where we will not fully load all the possible historical data into the sales order tables because of some of the limitations around how far you have to stretch with all the different data elements to make it work, but creating a cube data set already that exists out there for those years of history and using that as your starting point. So I think that's something to look into a little deeper. I don't have the exact way you would approach it, but my thought is you would point this reading of the data to another file for a period of time or another table until you get enough data and then kind of transition away from it.
All right. I'm not seeing any other questions right now.
Okay.
I don't know if anything else coming on your side, but...
Nope, I think that was it.
All right. Well, let's start wrapping up. So, well, Norman, thanks for taking us through all this information and this look at the features.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone's time today.
Yeah, thanks to everyone on the call. Please look for a quick survey that pops up when you leave. We really appreciate the feedback. It should only take 15 or 20 seconds to fill that out. With that, I will say have a great day. Thanks again, and that concludes today's event.
Okay. Thank you.